G'day, Nick. Sorry about the wait
G'day.
there. For some reason, my computer decided to be more than regularly slow this morning.
No worries, mate. No, that's totally fine. No worries at all. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. All the better for being able to talk with you. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah. What a lovely film that you've made. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, mate. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
It's really quite beautiful. Yeah. So I saw that it was on the lineup of the Films for Melbourne Documentary Film Festival and thought I should probably have a chat to this guy and figure out what's going on with his film. So thank you so much for your time. I'm just bringing up my notes as well. And
Sure.
I'm just recording. Don't stress about the recording on the Zoom. It's just for the audio so I can
That's
do the
fine.
transcription later on.
No
Um,
worries. No worries at all.
I didn't put my makeup on this morning, so it's okay.
Me either. Me either.
All right, let's get started. Um,
Mm.
this is a really wonderful documentary, as I was saying. Like, I thought it was quite a beautiful and gentle look at both mental health, but also how we can help those who deal with PTSD, deal with trauma, all of those kinds of things.
Mm.
How did you come to this story?
So a friend of mine who's a writer was telling me we were talking about veterans and I guess some of the problems they had readjusting to civilian life when they left the military, and it was in the news a lot. We're going back 6 years, and there was there's starting to get a bit of media attention about veteran suicide and that type of thing. And anyway, we were talking about it, and he said, "Oh, look, I've written an article about a guy in Sydney called Scott Brody who retrains thoroughbred racehorses, and to help him retrain the racehorses so that they have a second career and another sort of chance at life after their racing careers are over." He has been involving military veterans, and he's been teaching them how to retrain the horses. And he seems like he's getting really great results. And it turned out that Scott was very keen for someone to film what he was doing in the hope of getting some funding for his program down the track. You know, he'd been describing what he was doing to people, to potential funders, and they liked the idea of it. But because they couldn't see it, it was a kind of intellectual idea, and people would say to him, "Oh, that sounds great. Have you got anything you could show us?" And so he was saying to my mate, the writer, he said, "Oh, look, if you've come across any filmmakers that would like to, shoot some footage of what we're doing, it'd be really helpful." And so he mentioned it to me, and then he put me in touch with Scott. And then Scott said, "Look, I've got a course starting in 2 weeks' time. I've got about 5 or 6 veterans that are going to be on it, a couple of horses. There's an opportunity there if you want to come and film." And I just really like the idea of the mutual healing aspect of it is what really sold me on it. My cousin is an equine therapist, and so I knew that horses could be very good for troubled people.
Mm.
But I really liked the idea that what Scott was doing also kind of went further than that, in that the people were really good for these troubled horses. And so storytelling wise, I thought, oh, there's a really good thing going on here. And then I got a crew together. We got up to Sydney, and we filmed that 5-day course that you see a lot of in the film.
Mm. Yeah, it's as I was saying, it's quite beautifully shot as well.
Mm.
Can you talk about how you went about organizing the cinematographers for this too?
Yeah, look, the cinematographer Matthew Chuang has to take a lot of credit for that. I mean, he was a friend of mine, and we were looking to work together on something. And I told him about this opportunity, and I said, "Look, I really don't have any money. I had to sort of borrow some money to get I'd shot a documentary previously, and I shot a lot of that myself. And I've been an actor for 20 years. I'm certainly not a DOP, and I used my brother's 5D stills camera, the video component. I recorded sound myself, very like do-it-yourself, rough, film. So I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew that if I was going to go into the country and film thoroughbred racehorses, in that type of environment with the sort of troubled faces of some of these veterans, I really wanted it to look beautiful. And so I spoke to Matt, and he was great. I mean, he really embraced the idea. He got a fantastic crew together. We had 2 or 3 DOPs. We had 2 cameras, really beautiful, Alexa mini cameras, and 2 sound recorders. It was quite a big crew, certainly the biggest crew I've ever worked with as a director. and we just wanted to make the film look as cinematic as possible. You know, we kind of used a lot of slow motion and a lot of close-ups, and we were really trying to capture something that had a really beautiful feeling to it, because the environment and the horses, they really have that. You know, when you're on that property, you actually really sense like, oh God, this is an amazing place to be. You know, so I kind of wanted the film to give the viewer that sense that they'd been there, and to come away with those types of feelings. You know, so yeah. In answer to your question, Matthew and his crew were really instrumental in the look of the film.
When was it shot as well? Because it looks like the part of what I love about the visual style of it is it looks like it's part of shot in wintertime, because it's
Well,
that dull grey style.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. You know, I'm in Victoria, I'm in Melbourne, and this was shot in Kangaroo Valley in New South Wales, and it was shot June 2016. And that's when we first shot the first part of the film. And it was winter, and it had been raining really heavily. And I'd never been to that part of the world, and I don't think the crew had either. And we were blown away by how lush and green the whole place was. And I think we actually arrived a little bit late on the Monday, because we were trying to get onto the course started on a Monday, and we were anticipating getting there on a Sunday afternoon, setting up over that night. But it rained so heavily the day before that the little flood bridges, they flooded. Oh, wow. And we couldn't get onto the property on the Sunday. We had to wait for them to recede, and then we got on there early Monday morning. So it was a really lush, kind of quite wet environment, which was great for the film. Actually, it kind of you think of the Australian bush as like a kind of drier, harsher place, but this was sort of the opposite of that, really. And they had this amazing river that ran through the property that sort of almost had a rainforesty kind of feel. These enormous like ferns and stuff, you know, that were down on this thing, kind of very different to like a typical Victorian sort of bush landscape.
Yeah, that's one of the things which I found really quite impressive as well. Is I think there's a quote in the film where there's fear, there's no education, and this is a film that is really about being calm and peaceful. And you know, we're talking about the landscape and how that reflects the calm and the peacefulness of what's actually going on the property there.
Yes.
Can you talk about how to create that calm as you're directing and documenting the footage, and as well as in the editing stage as well?
I think when we were shooting, I mean, I'd said to Scott, Scott was very clear, and we agreed that the priority of the course was always the veterans and the horses. So our job was to really stay out of the way as much as possible, and as to be as unobtrusive as possible. So we tried to be quiet. You know, in terms of being calm, we really tried to stay in the background as much as we could. And also, you know, it's there's a real sense of kind of quite beautiful solitude and quiet out there. And I think that sort of informed just the way we interacted, the way we shot, the way we even recorded sound. We kind of wanted a lot of natural sound from the environment to kind of be through the film, because you can kind of like, you get away from the city, you get onto a property like that. It's like your senses take a little bit to adjust, but then you do start hearing like animal sounds from half a kilometer away that you probably never pick up in the city, and you start to kind of hear the breath of the horse starts to become like a real thing, you know, that you start to pick up on in quite a sort of intense way. So I think the environment and the veterans were very quiet as well. You know, they were very, particularly at the start of the course, they were very introverted. You know, they were very solitary. Even though they were in a group, they very much kept to themselves until they started to sort of, I guess, loosen up a bit and interact more. So the kind of, the way they were with each other, even though Scott's very much sort of in control of the whole thing, his whole demeanor too is quite calm and steady, you know. So I think those kind of things combined, they sort of told us how we needed to be around everyone in terms of shooting. And then when it came to the edit, it was pretty obvious that the film was going to have like quite a meditative, sort of slower pace. You know, mean, we were aware of that even when we were shooting. This wasn't going to be a film that had a lot of sharp, like fast cutting and that type of thing. Like it was going to kind of sit in silence and sit in a meditative kind of space sometimes. And we just embraced that in the edit. I mean, we were like, look, I don't know if people are going to be bored or if they're going to really enjoy it. I mean, there's whole, minutes go past where you're just watching Scott work with a horse and he's just trying to get it to do something. And then, or one of the veterans, there's a moment there where Max spends quite a bit of time trying to get a horse to put its foot up on a stump, and when he does, it really lights him up. It's this quite like beautiful moment for him. And I thought, well, actually, like that's a big moment of drama for this guy, in his journey. Like that moment's like actually really something. So then I thought, okay, so I'm making a film here where a very dramatic thing or a very, very kind of emotional thing is this guy getting a horse to put its foot on a stump, which, sort of seems like not a life or death situation, So it was, very interesting kind of journey editing the film with my editor, who, Sarah Edwards, who did such a wonderful job. She's a very sensitive, intelligent person. So she really brought a whole lot of empathy and feeling to it, which I really appreciated.
Yeah. That sense of calm there, does that also help when you're sitting down to talk with the veterans themselves about their own stories and help create that safe space that they need to be able to tell these very traumatic stories?
Yeah, I mean, when I started filming, I didn't know any of the veterans and I'd never met them before. I met them sort of as we were filming day one, which is probably not an ideal way. Like if I'd had more time, I probably would have spent more time with them prior. So I didn't know them and I didn't know their stories. I had no idea what their traumas were. I was assuming that they would mostly be combat related war trauma. And as I discovered, that wasn't the case. And in terms of sitting down with them, I didn't do those interviews until I think about the middle of day 3. So for the first couple of days at least, we just got to know each other. We just had chats around the campfire, or I'd have a chat to them over coffee. And none of them, to be honest, really wanted to do those interviews. I kind of put it to them like, it's completely fine if you want to talk about stuff and it's completely fine if you don't, I said, but the value of talking about them for the film is that we give an audience an understanding of what you've been through. And through that, all sorts of good things can come out for veterans that see the film who feel like, shit, that's similar to my story. I can relate to this person. And it also builds empathy for just the person who hasn't been through that type of trauma. If they struggle to imagine what it's like, those stories give you a pretty good idea of what some of these people are dealing with. And so each of the veterans, they really embraced, okay, there's a larger purpose here for telling these stories, and it was really that. It was really, I guess, their generosity and their courage in saying, okay, well, I'm going to share some of the stuff I've been through, which was amazing. And it was really just me and them sitting opposite each other at a table, and then me asking some questions. And like I said, because I didn't know them and their stories, I was really in the dark. But very quickly, these stories would come up, and I remember, I think Max went first. He was the first person we interviewed, and I remember about it. We talked to him for about an hour. And I remember when it finished, and he was quite emotional, and I thanked him and stuff. And I looked around at the crew, and they all had tears in their eyes. And I remember thinking, oh wow, this could be really moving for audiences.
Yeah, it was like listening to those stories. It's really, it adds, of course, it adds the context to what's going on and why they're there, but it is that emotional connection with them as well. And you're talking about trying to get a foot up on a stool, like trying to get a horse's foot up on a stool. And it's like that kind of moment is amplified. Why it's so important that happens, because we know what their stories are. And
yeah, that's right.
Those little victories are really important.
Yeah.
Loved it. I thought it was really beautiful.
Fantastic.
You leave the film as a dedication to, I assume they're people from your own family. Can you talk about
Yeah,
the
so
familial connection?
yeah, so that's so it's dedicated to my grandfather, um, and my great grandfather and his brother. So my great grandfather was injured in World War One, and then his brother was killed. And then my great grandfather, he was injured in World War One, and his brother was killed, and my grandfather was badly injured in World War Two, and my dad very narrowly missed getting caught up for Vietnam. So um, I kind of, yeah, I'd always had an empathy for veterans, and the things that they must go through. I know that my dad's dad never talked about what he went through, even though dad could see that it had had a pretty profound effect on him. That generation particularly, I think, found it very difficult to talk about what they went through. So I can't imagine that if you made this documentary back then, those veterans would sit down and tell you these stories. Maybe they would, I don't know, but I feel like we've come a fairly long way in terms of how people can express themselves and talk about this stuff. So yeah, it was just something I kind of was, it's just a personal touch to the film, I guess.
Yeah. Is there a personal connection to wanting to share the story and share the importance of mental health, discussing mental health? In particular, obviously there are women who attend the camp as well, but in particular men's mental health too.
Is there a personal connection from my point of view?
Yeah.
Look, I've been really fortunate. I haven't had any issues with mental health myself. I certainly have had friends that have suffered with anxiety and depression, not so much PTSD. No, look, it was more, I think it was more, I'd been reading quite a lot of stories about veteran suicide, and I had just been talking to my mate about why is this, why does this number seem so high? Like what's actually going on, and why aren't they getting the help they obviously need? So I had a lot of questions around it, I guess. And I guess to that point, we've just remastered the film. We had to make one. So the Royal Commission, there's a Royal Commission into defence and veteran suicide on at the moment. And when we finished the film mid last year, when we locked the film off, the suicide statistics was something. There was something like there'd been 44 deaths in combat since the war in Afghanistan began, Australian military deaths, and there'd been something like 400 and something suicides. Right, so that was the statistic at the time. So we were saying that there'd been roughly 10 times more serving military personnel and veteran suicide than they'd been killed in combat. But then they did another count because of the Royal Commission. They did another count, and they actually found that the suicide rate was much, much higher. And the actual numbers are more, I think they're over 1,200 something now. So then we were looking at like 44 deaths in combat in a 20-year period, but like 1,200 plus suicides. So we've gone back into the film. We've changed that sort of one of the last cards. So it now says not 10 times more. It now says 30 times more. So there's clearly it's kind of a staggering number, and I'm very curious to see what will come out of the Royal Commission. Why is the suicide rate so high? Like, what are some of the contributing factors, and why are people not getting help they obviously urgently need? I'm very keen to see what comes of that. And I suppose to that end, we've played the film for the Royal Commission. Scott, one of the veterans who appears in the film, went before the Royal Commission to talk about their trauma, and they mentioned that they'd found this guy, Scott Brodie Horseman, who was helping them, who had helped them a lot. So then the Royal Commission said, well, could we get this guy in to talk about what he's doing? So then Scott went before the Royal Commission, and he talked about the work he was doing, and then they wanted to see the film, which was a really good thing for us, because they even played the teaser for the film during the live stream of the Royal Commission. And I remember saying to Scott about 3 years ago, I said, when it was obvious that there was going to be a Royal Commission, I said, wouldn't it be, we've got to get this film finished and we've got to play it for the Royal Commission so that they can see what the work you're doing, but they can also see and hear some of the stories of what these veterans have been through. And he said, oh yeah, that'd be great, you know. So it was a really amazing day when he was sitting at the Royal Commission, and then they played the teaser for the film. And they've since watched the film, and they're very, very supportive of it, you know, which was fantastic. So we've got a screening, obviously, coming up the closing night of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, but we're also looking to do a screening at Parliament House in Canberra around about mid-September. So we want to get as many, we want to get as many, you know, politicians, DVA, RSL, press, get them there to sort of see the film on the big screen.
Yeah. I think that certainly when you get it in front of the right people, hopefully it inspires some change, or at least informs their decisions going forward. As you're saying, playing at the Royal Commission is a really important and powerful thing. And it's probably a bit of a rarity as well for filmmakers to have that kind of achievement, to be able to play in front of that kind of audience and have that kind of impact. So
look, it was really cool because we have a website for the film, and after the teaser played during the live stream of the Royal Commission, we had a lot of veterans contacting us via the website saying, where can I see the film? Where can I do this course? And it's interestingly, when people contact us, it's typically a wife or a partner or a parent of the veteran. You know, it's often not the veteran themselves because they're really struggling. But we get a lot of particularly, you know, partners contacting us saying, my boyfriend or my husband or my girlfriend or whatever are really in a bad way. They've tried all these things. They haven't worked. We'd like to give this horse thing a go. Where can we do it? So I think we'll get a lot more of that once the film's released, obviously.
Yeah. So is there an impact campaign that will come out after the film's release as well?
Yeah, there will be. We're sort of in the process of working out how and when we're going to release the film in Australia. The film has just been sold, just made its first TV broadcast sale to a channel called YLE in Finland. And we're very close to making some other really big international sales. So,
nice.
So yeah, it's going to be great to get this film out internationally as well. I've just been very interested to see what the feedback is and what the, you know, like, because you can start then sharing information from country to country, and like, what are you guys doing there for your veterans and horses, and what are we doing here? And I think Scott will have a really good time with all that.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk about you personally now, because as you're saying, you've had, you know, 20 years of acting, and now you're moving into directing. Can you talk about the decision to make that transition? Obviously, you can still act and all this kind of stuff. One's not exclusive of the other, but what was the decision to decide to become a director?
I think I don't remember there being like any one particular moment. I just, for quite a long time as an actor, I've been thinking, this is great and I love doing it, and I still am doing it, but I do want to start telling my own stories as well. And I've really been very attracted to documentaries for a long time. I really, you know, I really like the thing about documentaries is I really like that I typically don't know anyone in the documentary. You know, I love going in there and meeting faces that I've never heard about. I don't know their backstories. And sometimes with movies, you know, that's sort of, it seems like it's getting harder and harder now to watch a film and not be aware of the actor's kind of personal life, or the, you know, the products they endorse, or the, you know, the talk shows they've been on. And so I often find myself just going much more quickly into the world of a documentary. And so I thought, oh yeah, well, maybe I'll start seeing if I could make some documentaries myself, you know, because the documentaries that I really like, they're often typically structured like a drama film anyway. You know, that sort of emotional kind of dramatic journey in documentaries I've really always loved. And the first documentary I made was about a mate of mine who was a professional boxer, and he got a last-minute call up to fight for the world title in America against an undefeated fighter. And I remember him calling me up saying, oh shit, I've just been offered a world title fight in America. And he was at the end of his career. He was ranked 12 in the world. Probably wasn't going to get a call up to fight for the world title. It's just that the opponent broke his hand in training and they needed a replacement. So they called my mate. He was ranked 12 in the world. And they said, do you want to come to Texas and fight this guy? Short notice. He had 5 weeks to prepare. And he called me to tell me. And I just sort of found myself saying, I'd love to film that. And he said, all right, we'll get in the gym tomorrow because I got to get in shape. And like I said, at that point, I didn't have a camera. I didn't have anything. And I'd never used it. I mean, I'd literally never filmed anything. So I grabbed my brother's stills camera, which is a 5D stills camera, and used the video component and then rigged up some sound gear and then started shooting the next day. And then I think we filmed for 4 weeks in Melbourne and then a week in Texas for all the fight stuff. And then I followed him on and off for about a year and a half after that to see what effect the fight had on his personal life. And that just really whet my appetite for it. You know, that was as do it yourself as you could probably make a film. And I knew that after that, you know, I had so many limitations of just lack of experience and technical skill and money and all that. So I remember thinking, okay, the next one I do has to be far more professional than that, you know, which this one definitely was. And it's just, yeah, it's really whet my appetite to do more of it. You know, I really, I just, yeah, really love it.
Yeah. You've previously worked with Alkonos, who, you know, the films that you've done together are really great. I understand that he's a lecturer too, does lecturing. Did you learn anything from him? Was he somebody you could turn to for guidance or support?
No, I've certainly never studied with Alkonos. You know, I mean, I've acted in his films, obviously, but no, he wasn't. I mean, he's not a documentary filmmaker. So I was more reaching out to documentary filmmakers, particularly with this last one. I was kind of like, you know, I'm going to have horses and people and 2 cameras and like, how do I do it? You know? So no, he wasn't a reference, but certainly some other documentary filmmakers I leaned on pretty heavily because I remember I think it was the second day of the shoot, and there was like the 2 horses in the film, and then there was all these other horses, and then there were, you know, the veterans, and I just remember feeling very overwhelmed, like, what have I done here? You know, like, where do I tell the camera guys to film? And like, you know, it felt like I was doing Dances with Wolves or something. And that's the, you know, in my head where I'd come from, I was like, fuck, this is too big. But yeah, I mean, look, I've got a lot of filmmaker friends, you know, so, and they've all been, the ones I reached out to were really helpful in just giving me whatever sort of advice they could. And then I guess for me, on this one, the 5-day course, it was funny. There was a similarity. The first film I made about the boxer called Inside Fighter, you know, there was 5 weeks leading up to this fight that could potentially really change this guy's life, you know. And in my head, I was thinking, okay, well, the film's going to be like he wins or loses, you know, and that's the movie. After the fight, I remember thinking, oh, okay, it's kind of a depressing ending. All right, I guess that's what it is, you know. And then I was talking to another friend of mine, a writer, and he said, no, now you've really got a film. Like now you got to follow this guy. You got to see what effect this event has on him, like over a longer period, you know. And I remember thinking, I'd never thought of that. I was like so fixated on, we've got 5 weeks, get this thing done, and then I thought, oh fuck, that's a good idea. And then like I said, I followed sort of Frank, the protagonist in the film, for another 18 months, and that's kind of what gave that film its resonance, actually, you know. And similarly to this film, after I filmed the first 5 days where the veterans complete this first course, when I realized at the end of it that Scott offers an opportunity for these veterans to continue working with him over years, I thought, I wonder if any of them will do that. And then if they do that, like what change would then take place? Because that could be really significant, you know. I could see that over 5 days, they'd certainly gone through some really positive experiences and change. But then you can't help but wonder, but then do they go back to their lives, which have a lot of dysfunction and pain and stuff like that, and then do things fall apart again, you know? I certainly had that question. And then I guess staying in touch with them and seeing where they were up to, I realized that you know, the majority of them kept working with Scott for long periods of time and really improved their horsemanship skills. And then I remember Mel saying, yeah, and I've just written a book and I'm going to do a book launch and it's about my journey of working with Scott and the horses. And I thought, fuck, this woman, very, very troubled kind of woman I met on day one of that course, you know, 2.5 years later is now, you know, publishing a book and doing a book reading at this big room full of people. It seemed like a massive journey from where I met her to where she was. And then each of them kind of were going through these really profound sort of transformations, you know. And then I thought, oh, I've got to keep filming. You know, this film is not just 5 days. It's got to, and then before you know it, it becomes years. You know, like, so I was, you know, I remember saying to my wife, like, I went up there thinking this would be 5 days of filming, and then I'd put together a little thing for Scott maybe. And then, you know, you look at the clock and it's 3 years later and you're still filming them. And it's kind of mind blowing. Like you just never imagine that this thing's going to take that long. And it's going to take you to these places, you know. I suppose that's one of the beauties about documentaries, the long form documentary. It's the real gift of it is that you have no idea where this will go. But it's also the pain of it too, because you don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know how long you're going to film. You don't know what the ending is. You just don't. You sort of have to keep having some sort of faith that'll work out, I guess.
Yeah, faith in the process and the conclusion and all this kind of stuff. And I guess, as you're saying, you've got filmmaker people who you can lean on for support and guidance. Were there any films that you watched in preparation for this to get an idea of what you were going to possibly be dealing with?
No, I just, like I said, from when both films that I've made, I've had very little preparation time. To like the boxing one was like overnight, I'm doing it, and then I'm filming the next day. There's zero preparation. I mean, I've watched a lot of films. I've watched a lot of documentaries. So you kind of find yourself going back to favorite films in your head and trying to remember scenes or how they shot them or what the feeling of it was. I didn't have any, before we started the healing, I didn't have any time to watch anything. I just remember talking to Matt in the car on the way up and just saying, like, let's shoot this as cinematically as we can, you know, like, let's really go to town with slow motion and close-ups. And we don't want this to look like a standard sort of talking heads TV doco, you know, like, let's find interesting ways and see what we can do, you know, with how close can we get to the horses and you know, like, what can we achieve? Because we'd never shot near thoroughbred racehorses, and then you in a round yard, and then you've got to. I remember initially we started filming them from outside the round yard, but looking at the footage, it just wasn't visceral enough. We weren't capturing the feeling of being right up next to it, you know. So then I remember Matt going, "Oh fuck, I'm getting in there," and then him jumping in there and being really close, and then whizzing around, the horse running around him. And I mean, the cameramen were really brave, actually. It was, you know, and because the horses are, you know, they are quite unpredictable, and they're also very powerful, you know. So if it goes wrong, it can go really badly.
Yeah, that shot where the cameraman's in the middle and it's just turning super quick, and it's a really beautiful shot because it just really puts you in the moment, but it's also very skilled. Like, I think that's the kind of shot that people look at and go, right, well, how exactly did they do that? Oh, it's as simple as just getting in there and doing it. And often people don't think of that. They don't think of the most practical thing, which is getting into the thick of it.
Yeah. No, they were great. I mean, honestly, like, my heart was in my mouth because the cameras are expensive, the lenses are expensive. You know, I remember seeing a documentary years ago where a really troubled horse reared up and bit someone on the face. And it just stuck. I was sure, like, these horses weren't going to do that, but in the back of my head, I was like, fuck, if one of these horses kicks someone, it kicks the camera, bites someone hard, like, we're going to be in all sorts. So, you know, and because we had 2 cameras, I couldn't always tell what everyone was shooting. So part of it is you get into the edit and you're going through all the rushes and you get these amazing surprises because you're thinking, fuck, I never saw that being shot. Oh, what an amazing sequence, or what a great shot, or we can cut, you know. So yeah, it was really fascinating discovering, I guess, after the shoot too, what some of the cameramen had managed to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Nick, I really appreciate your time and being able to talk about this and share the stories of how it was made.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
The last question, which I like to ask filmmakers, I tend to focus mostly on Australian films. And because of that, I like finding out what it means to be an Australian filmmaker to the people I talk with. So what does it mean to be an Australian filmmaker to you?
That's a good question. I love watching Australian films. I think for me, there's just an opportunity to share. Like one of my favorite filmmakers is a guy called Alan Clark, and he was a British filmmaker, and I think he made only maybe 3 feature films, but he made a lot of work for TV and some very, really bold, like really amazing stuff, sort of 80s in the UK. And it was kind of like when you watched his stuff, you really got a sense of what it was like to live in that country at that time. He seemed very tapped into what it was to be British in that period, and what was going on in the country. So I've always really loved filmmakers that could give you a very strong sense of place in the place that they live, so that really interests me about being an Australian filmmaker is reflecting back to Australian audiences. This is how I think we're living, and then beyond that, there's an opportunity to share a very local story with the world, obviously, so that you start to see like what connects us as human beings, like regardless of where we live. I think The Healing is a good example of a very local story. Scott, in a way, is almost like an iconic sort of Man from Snowy River type character. You know what I mean? Like there's something extremely authentic about him and about the work that he's doing and about the veterans that I felt like feels to me like a very honest group of people. And I felt like I could really give a sense to audiences of just a really local story. But what I loved about it was that it had a very universal theme and sort of universal journeys that people were going through, which was, healing from trauma. And so whether it was like you live in a country that has veterans and it also has horses that, that are troubled, that type of thing, or you're just someone who's been through some really hard times yourself and understands what it's like to try and recover from that. It's a long-winded way of saying that I really love focusing on the local part of the story, all the nuances of living in this particular part of the world. But then I'm really interested to find the universal aspects of that unites us wherever we live.
What's the thing is like specificity, if I can ever say that word, always brings a familiarity. Like there's something, making something so specific makes it very relatable. There are films that I've seen from Iran, which, we've got a completely different culture than there, and yet I can relate completely to them because of how focused they are. So I love that answer. It's a great answer. Yeah.
There was a film I saw years ago. I think it was Vittorio De Sica, but I might have that filmmaker wrong. It's a film called Rocco and His Brothers.
Oh yeah.
And I have 2 younger brothers. We all grew up playing sport. We didn't have much money growing up. We lived in the country. We moved to the city. Very loving family, but we certainly had our moments of disagreements and all that. And I remember seeing this film, Rocco and His Brothers, about this family that moves from somewhere in Italy, really poor area, to the city to try and make a go of it, and things go really wrong for them. And it's culturally so different, to where I grew up but the themes of it were like, there was some things in it I thought, this is like my family, this is like my relationship with my brothers, this is like, that's a bit like my auntie, that's a bit like my mum, so I remember thinking, God, I got a good sense from that film of what it's like to live there at that time, but actually the personal relationships and what's going on, like I relate to them in contemporary country Victoria really strongly.
Yeah.
So I was always fascinated by that, how you could, the filmmakers I seem to gravitate to seem to be able to really tap into the universal experience, like the common kind of humanity, no matter where the film's set.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's always surprising, like you say, you go and see an Iranian film or something, and it culturally and whatever can be very, very different. But then you start laughing at like some of the similarities between relationships between people and what drives people and motivates people. They seem to be often just really global, universal things.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, Nick, and being able to talk about The Healing. And I hope that the screening at Melbourne Documentary Film Festival goes well. It's pretty impressive to have a closing night film. So yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, no, we're wrapped. Yeah, well, look, if you're in Melbourne, come along. We're on the July 31st, Sunday night at 6:30. So yeah, please come along. And then we've got a website out there as well if you want to know more about the film. And I'll certainly, share with you the where we're up to in terms of when we decide to release it and how. And
please do.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, then I can share this again and make sure everybody is aware of it, because I think it's a film that people will get a lot out of. Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic, man. Awesome. Thank you. Cheers, appreciate Nick. Your time.
Likewise. Have a wonderful day. Cheers.
You too. Thanks, mate. Bye.
Bye.